Outlaws of Thunder Junction has brought brand new cards into the standard and modern meta, so I'm here to tell you the top 10 decks to keep in mind when you're adding new cards to these decks. We're going to start with standard and then go to modern. So the first deck we are going to talk about is Demir Midrange. This deck has your typical aggressive package with a tempo game plan. The only brand new card coming to this deck is Tiny Bones the Pickpocket. It's a 1-mana 1/1 Death Touch Skeleton Rogue. Whenever Tiny Bones the Pickpocket deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So yes, it is only non-land permanents, but if you kill your opponent's thing with a removal spell and then get in with Tiny Bones, first of all, your opponent doesn't want to block this to begin with since it has Death Touch, so it might trade up in value, but even if your opponent does trade with it, you can cast their creature that you just killed back from their graveyard. So, and let's not forget about Duelist of the Mind in the 2-drop slot. It's 1 in a blue for a human advisor with flying and vigilance. Its power is equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. And whenever you commit a crime, you can draw a card. If you do discard a card, and it triggers only once each turn. So this card can get really, really big if you've drawn a lot of cards, and also generates pseudo value in the form of card selection when you target your opponent's thing. The second deck that we want to mention here is Mono Red Aggro. Mono Red is back in standard, and that is due to a new card that is getting a lot of hype, and that is Slick Shot Show Off. 1 in a red for a 1/2 bird wizard with flying and haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Slick Shot Show Off gets +2/+0 until end of turn, and it has plot for 1 and a red, which means you can pay 1 in a red to exile it, and then you can cast it on a later turn for 0 mana. So you can start your turn off with Slick Shot Show Off. It has flying and haste, and it has prowess, except for it doesn't gain toughness, it gains an additional power. So I've seen this card attack for 17 damage on turn 3 in a deck like this, and it even has one more new card in it as well, Scorching Shot. It's double red for a sorcery. Scorching Shot deals 5 damage to target creature. Yes, it is a sorcery, which isn't too good when you're talking about prowess creatures, but it is a non-creature spell, so it does buff your creatures, and it also deals 5 damage. So it kills Gildred the Apocalypse and other things that might be in your way. And for 2 mana, for 5 damage, I'm pretty sure that's the best rate we've seen for a 5 damage card in recent memory. So Mono Red getting a big upgrade here in Slick Shot Show Off and Scorching Shot. Moving on to the third deck, we have Domain, and this is a deck that you've seen for a while if you're familiar with Standard. But the Big Score set in the new set has come out with a reprint of Rest in Peace. So you see in the sideboard here, 3 copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard to beat the Lands Graveyard deck. Everything else is stock in here as well, but it got first place in the tournament. It's 9-1 in a standard challenge recently, and it does have 3 copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard. So make sure that you keep your graveyard decks in check. Make sure you have answers to Rest in Peace, because that card got reprinted in standard, with very, very powerful card. Next up, we have Jeskai Control, and this is the second to last deck for standard. It's got Jace, Wandering Emperor, Eternal Wander in there. Obviously, you have the Planeswalkers in there, but the new card, we have Final Showdown. 1 mana instant with Spree. All creatures lose all abilities to end of turn. Choose a creature you control, it gains indestructible till end of turn, and you can also pay 5 mana to destroy all creatures. So you can pay 6 mana to destroy all creatures at instant speed, and also for 7 mana, you can remove their abilities as well. So even if your opponent has a bunch of death triggers, you can remove their abilities and kill all their creatures at instant speed, which is amazing. Playing 1 of that in the deck. 4 copies of a new Spree card as well called 3 Steps Ahead. 1 mana instant with Spree, plus 1 in a blue to counter a spell. So it's basically just a cancel. You can plus 3 mana on it to make a token that's a copy of a creature you control, and you can pay 2 extra to draw 2, discard a card. So it's similar to like a Sublime Epiphany kind of effect, except for you get to choose which one you want, or you can do all of them. So super good modal counter spell in this deck. We also have another card in here in this list. It's called High Noon. It's an enchantment, 1 and a white. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, and you can pay 4 in a red and sacrifice it to deal 5 damage to any target. Kill your opponent, can kill one of your creatures. So it's really good in the main deck as well, since it can be just a pseudo removal spell for a lot of mana, but it can even help beat decks that want to cast a bunch of spells in the same turn and make sure you don't lose out on the tempo game. Especially good against prowess decks. This High Noon card, brand new, to this control deck as well. So a lot of good control tools in this deck. We also have another copy of High Noon in the sideboard. 3 more copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard as well. You're going to see a lot of that in standard. Rest in Peace reprint, very powerful once again. That's all we have for the control deck. We have Azorius Artifacts coming up next, which was already a deck which was already a deck centered around ramping with artifact ramp and taking over the game with either sweepers or huge constructs that get bigger based on the number of artifacts you control. This deck has a brand new card as well in there, Assimilation Aegis, I think it's called. 3 mana for an artifact equipment. When it ETBs, exile up to 1 target creature until this leaves the battlefield. So it's a removal spell and an equipment. And then whenever this becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Assimilation Aegis remains attached to it, that creature becomes a copy of a creature exiled with Assimilation Aegis. So exile something your opponent controls that's super big, a super good card, and then make any of your things a copy of it, which is very, very powerful. And of course, we see 3 copies of Rest in Peace in the sideboard of this deck as well. That wraps up Standard. Let's go ahead and move on to Modern, which we have 4 decks to show you in Modern that brand new cards have changed the game for these decks. Number 1 is Temur Prowess. This deck features a card we already talked about, Slickshot Show Off. It's good enough to even make it in Prowess decks in Modern. This is a Dragonmage Channeler Monastery Swiftspear deck, but it also showcases Slickshot Show Off as well. I don't believe there's any other new cards in here. There's usually only going to be like 1 or 2 new cards, usually 1 card in Modern that makes it into Modern, because Modern is a very, very powerful format. So these are the cards that are going to break into Modern. Slickshot Show Off, showing its power there. We have our next deck, which is Mono Green Hardened Scales. This deck features Hangerback Walker, Walking Ballista, Zabaz, and to trigger a bunch of artifact death triggers as well. We have a copy of Lost Jite in this deck, which is a new card from the Big Score. 1 mana legendary artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage, put a charge counter on it. You can remove a charge counter from it to choose 1, untap a land. Target creature can't block this turn, and put a 1/1 counter on equipped creature, and it's only equipped for 1. And since this deck is playing 4 copies of Urza Saga, you can get Lost Jite out of the deck, put it on the battlefield, equip it to one of your things, and make creatures not be able to block, which is really powerful and is such an aggro deck like Hardened Scales is. The second to last deck, Affinity. This deck got massively upgraded. There's a brand new card called Simulacrum Synthesizer. 2 and a blue for an artifact. Whenever this ETBs, scry 2. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, make a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So it makes constructs, and also it triggers when something ETBs with mana value 3 or greater. And by something I mean artifact. And there are a bunch of them in this deck. 4 copies of Frogmite, 4 Sojourner's Companion, 4 Thought Monitor, all over 3 mana value. Also, you have 3 copies of Nettlecyst in here, which will also trigger Simulacrum Synthesizer. So this deck is rolling on all cylinders. I guess no pun intended on that. You thought Affinity could go wide to begin with. I mean, this can go even wider with a bunch of constructs after they start playing Simulacrum Synthesizer, and they are already playing it. It got 11th place in a Modern Challenge. It went 5-2, so good upgrade for Affinity there. Moving on to the last deck, it is Thopter Combo. Thopter Combo is a tier 2 strategy right now, not tier 1, but it does have an upgrade in the new set. Worldbreaker Helm, 2 and a blue for an artifact. If you would create 1 or more artifact tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional map token. And then it's 1 and a blue and tap it to create a token that's a copy of target artifact token you control. So you make a bunch of token artifacts and then keep copying your artifacts. Also, if you have Urza, Lord High Artificer in play, making your artifacts get additional map tokens means that you can gain additional mana. So it's just another way to get your combo rolling, since every artifact you cast is 2 additional mana, right? Because you're both of your artifacts can tap for mana, tap for blue mana with Urza, Lord High Artificer in play. So very good addition to Thopter Combo. If you have interest in any of these 10 decks from Standard and Modern coming up in your RCQ or Pro Tour seasons as well, make sure to pick up the cards, make sure to get your boxes, make sure to get your packs at prodigygames.com. You can click the link down in the description below to help me out as well, and also get 7% off of your entire order by using code JAME7 at checkout. This is the one Jame at prodigygames.com, signing out. Peace.